Hi, welcome to the regular meeting of Brisbane Planning Commission, Thursday, September 24th, 2015, 7:30 p.m., Brisbane City Hall, 50 Park Place, Brisbane. Call to order.
Commissioner Anderson?
Present.
Commissioner Doe?
Present.
Commissioner Manier?
Here.
Commissioner Reinhardt?
Here.
The record reflect Commissioner Parker is absent.
Okay, adoption of the agenda. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I would like to amend the agenda.
Okay.
I'd like to move commissioner items up before the workshop. I have about a 5-minute thing I would like to go through.
Okay. Is that okay with everyone?
It's
Yes.
related to the
That's
EIR.
fine with me.
EIR.
And I make a motion to adopt the agenda
As amended?
as amended.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner.
You're on.
All right, my item. All right, so I was asked about the searchable and browsable versions of the FEIR that are available on the city website. Some people have found these to be more useful than the PDFs because the technology for the PDF is a little clunky and difficult to navigate through. Now, the new ones are easier for some people, but they still present some challenges because they're a little rough. So I had a talk today with Tim Salvason from TRS Consulting, and the consultants for the Baylands project are starting a project to make these browsable, searchable versions of the FEIR more accessible. So we're still in the early stages of this. We're going to have a call about it next week. I'm going to help them as best I can in an advisory capacity as an individual, not as a commissioner, just for the purpose of making these documents easier to read for people. And we will do our best to make this available as soon as possible, but we don't have a schedule or even really a scope right now. So if anyone has had any experience with these documents and has suggestions about how they would like to see them improved, please contact either myself or Tim, and we'll try to fit it in. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Okay. So on to the workshop.
Yes, I'd just like to introduce Lloyd Zola from Metis, who will be doing this evening's workshop number 2.
Thank you. And this is the last of the longer presentations. After this, they're going to be a lot shorter, and the public will have far more time. What we're going to talk about tonight will be we'll start with the content. Oh, I should take. Technology is so wonderful. Okay, We'll talk first about the contents of the final EIR that Greg had just mentioned, because at the end of this process, depending on the actions you take, you will be asked to recommend or not recommend certification of the EIR, but all of the information that we'll be talking about through this process, through the hearings, we'll have a lot of information coming from the EIR. The final EIR consists of the draft EIR, and I'll describe that one in a second, but then also includes other documents. In the final EIR, in addition to the draft EIR, Chapter 1 is an introduction that explains what a final EIR is and how it differs than the draft EIR that went out for public review last year. It also includes responses to comments. So all of the responses to every written comment and all the verbal comments that came at your October 2013 hearings are in Chapter 2. Chapter 3, based on any revisions that those responses identified, are all laid out in Chapter 3. That is not typical of a final EIR. Some final EIRs you have to wade through every response to figure out what revisions were made. We group them all so somebody can go through Chapter 3 and see every revision to the draft EIR that's being proposed. Chapter 4 is a mitigation monitoring and reporting program, which I'll describe in a second. And then Chapter 5 is hundreds, or actually a couple of, almost 1,000 pages worth of the actual letters that were received from public and agencies. Some of them 100, 200-page letters are actually there.
I have a question. If we notice omissions or something that was missing from Chapter 3, what's the process for bringing those to your attention?
Just let John know, and we'll compile them and make sure that they're filled.
Okay, thanks.
Now, the Draft EIR, which is the first part of what you will be considering at the end of the public hearings, was circulated for public review starting in June 2013, went through January 24th. So a very long public review period, normally 45 days is what is required under CEQA. The city also conducted, actually the Planning Commission conducted public hearings on the Draft EIR in 3 dates, October 22nd, 24th, and 29th of 2013. So there were hearings held on the Draft EIR. The Draft EIR addresses the components we talked about last time: a general plan amendment, the concept plan scenarios, the applicant's proposed specific plan. It addresses site remediation and Title 27 landfill closure, as well as the proposed water supply agreement. The conclusions of the Draft EIR were that throughout just about every section of that EIR, there were significant impacts. Significant impacts are those impacts that exceed the thresholds that are identified in the EIR. So for every impact statement, there is a threshold that says anything greater than that is significant, anything less than that is less than significant. For every impact identified as being significant, CEQA required mitigation measures to be proposed. Those mitigation measures are shown in the EIR, and then you will see at the end of the discussion following the mitigation measures an analysis as to whether those mitigation measures then reduce the significant impact below the threshold. And in many cases, it did not do that. The mitigation measures could not do that. There were no mitigation measures that would reduce the impacts of a large project down to that. So those are identified as significant, unavoidable impacts. And those appear for all of the 4 scenarios in terms of aesthetics and visual resources, air quality, biological resources, in that case, bird strikes, greenhouse gas emissions, noise and vibration, population, traffic, utilities, and water supply. So you will at the end be asked of the hearings, as you look at the EIR and if you contemplate an approval of any kind, you would look at how do we balance those significant unavoidable impacts against what you might recommend approving? Is the benefits of what you might approve greater than those unavoidable impacts? And there will be that weighting. And if you contemplate at the end of the hearings an approval, we will prepare for you a draft, what is called Statement of Overriding Considerations, that provides that balancing that you will review and make a determination. Do you agree with that or not? We talked about the alternatives last time. The Draft EIR also has alternatives: no project, no build, leaving everything exactly as it is, building out the existing general plan, the renewable energy generation alternative, and then 2 reduced intensity alternatives. And I did describe those last time. In the final EIR, there were, during that 7-month public review period, 54 comment letters provided to the city. That through those 54 letters are about 2,200 comments. At one time I knew the exact number, no more. But about 2,200 actual individual comments. There were, at the 3 public hearings, 7 speakers who provided 79 additional comments. In that final EIR, I mentioned Chapter 2, there are responses to every one of those 22, almost 2,300 comments. They come in 3 forms. One are what are called master responses. So in some cases, we receive a lot of different comments that ask same or similar questions. There were, for example, a number of questions. Is there adequate information to support the analysis of hazardous materials? Is there adequate information to analyze the impacts related to biology? A number of questions from For example, San Francisco, water companies, or the irrigation districts regarding the proposed water supply agreement and its impacts. So those are grouped into 35 general responses called master responses. There then are specific responses to every one of those 2,200 comments, some of which may say, look at master response number 1. So a comment, for example, that raises questions about the impacts of diverting water out of the Stanislaus River will be, the response will be see master response, and I can't remember the number, that addresses the water supply. So that is one way that responses are made. In other cases, it may simply say, see response number, because even within individual comment letters, there are some comments sometimes that are very similar. Chapter 3, as I mentioned, includes revisions to the draft EIR. These revisions come from the responses. So in a case where a response to a comment says, yes, you are right, we need to revise the second paragraph in the introduction on page 6. We show the revision in the comment, in the response to that comment, as well as in chapter 3. So as people are reviewing individual comments, if somebody is looking at responses to their comment letter, they will be able, from that review, to see every revision recommended to the draft EIR based on their comments. And if somebody wants to look at what is the total of every revision being proposed, then you just go through chapter 3. And so there are recommended revisions actually to every section. Some is just a single revision, sometimes minor, sometimes larger, but every section other than public services. Now, the revisions to the draft EIR that are being recommended basically clarify information, correct information, but they are not providing new analyses that would cause recirculation of the draft EIR, which would be a finding that would be made towards the end of the process. The mitigation monitoring program. There were a number of comments to the draft EIR about mitigation measures. I'll paraphrase some of them, kind of saying, as I just said in my comments on somebody else's EIR in another city, yeah, you say that, but your history is not implementing the mitigation measures you include in your own EIRs. Mitigation monitoring program is required under the law. The mitigation measures in the EIR are required by law to be implemented. And the purpose of this mitigation monitoring program is to lay out a process so that you as the commission in making your recommendations to the city council, the council is taking an action at the end, and the public can know not only these are the mitigation measures that are being proposed in the EIR, but this is the process we will use to make sure they are implemented. And the mitigation monitoring program that is included in the Baylands EIR is far more detailed than what is typical. Typical mitigation monitoring program is, here's the mitigation measure, here's when it needs to be done, and here's who's going to sign it off. And it doesn't tell you who's going to monitor what, who actually is going to do the physical improvements. So in this mitigation monitoring program, we show first, what is the impact that the measure is even trying to mitigate? Why does this mitigation measure exist? What is the mitigation measure? Who is responsible for physically doing what the mitigation measure says? Not just who's going to do it later. So in cases where we are saying the developer shall, in that mitigation monitoring program, it's very clear, the developer shall do this, as opposed to so-and-so shall sign it off later. It also identifies who is responsible for enforcing, making sure that it actually is done. How often will monitoring be done? And there'd be different kinds of mitigation measures that need to be monitored differently. So this is our intent as a city as to how we will monitor and know that progress is being made. And then what actions need to be done so we know somebody actually implemented it, as opposed to, here it is, here's when, and somebody sign it. So the public, you as the commission and the public and the council will have a greater degree of certainty than is normal under CEQA as to how all those mitigation measures in the EIR actually get implemented. We had talked 2 weeks ago about studies you will be getting, and these are the planning studies that go beyond CEQA. So there will be economic studies that are being prepared. The reason these go beyond CEQA is CEQA deals, remember, with physical environmental impacts, not costs, not revenues, not financial feasibility. So these are over and above CEQA for your review and information as you make your ultimate recommendations. Two types of studies will be done. One is called a fiscal impact study, which will measure from the proposed development, what are the costs and revenues that the city of Brisbane would see? How much will it cost us to provide services? How much will it generate in terms of revenues? And that is information that you will get.
Do you have an estimate on when that's going to be available?
That was going to be my question, too.
And the answer is I don't.
At this moment, no, we don't have a estimated date for those materials.
We ask that a lot, but we'll just keep asking till.
Yeah.
The reason for asking this question is that in order to decide what to do with the site, we need to have that before Planning Commission makes any recommendation.
Understand, yes.
Yeah. The other study that will be done are just what are the costs associated with site development. So the fiscal impact study will deal with ongoing annual revenues and annual costs. Feasibility analysis will talk about what are the costs of actually not building the buildings, but dealing with infrastructure issues and so on.
Excuse me, are you going to also include the cost for the mitigation measures in this as to how much is going to cost to mitigate certain hazards?
No. And the reason for that is those mitigation measures are obligatory and they must be implemented. And so those are not, some of them actually will track as you look at some infrastructure issues, what are costs of infrastructure, because there are mitigation measures to put infrastructure in place. So there will be some overlap, but no, each individual mitigation measure has not been costed out.
Because it's important to know the overall cost for this particular project as to what it will be in terms of removing all the hazards.
If I could, Lloyd? Lloyd, if I could?
Okay.
Yeah, I think some of these, I think what we're talking about that will be captured are some of the, whether they're conditions or mitigation measures that are kind of critical to getting the property developed in any way, shape, or form, things like mass grading, remediation, major infrastructure. In a sense, these are all mitigation measures, but they're also required. So at that level, yes, there will be some analysis and discussion of that, I expect, in the feasibility analysis. But I think we're talking about literally costing out each of the several hundred mitigation measures that might relate to, certain kind of biological monitoring. You're not going to get to that fine level. It's going to be at a much broader level, because really the goal is to try to understand if there are certain elements that have a financial bearing on the ultimate ability for anybody to develop a project out there.
Yeah, we should cover and identify what those will be so that we will have a clear idea when we make the decision here at the Planning Commission.
I have a question about that. A few slides ago, you said that it's going to be identified who's responsible for all of the different costs. Is that part of the fiscal plan or the specific plan, or which document is that?
That is in the mitigation monitoring and reporting program. So it will say, for example, if, I'm trying to think of a mitigation measure, who is required to build, construct infrastructure? It will say, if it says install this facility, it will say in that the developer shall install. The Brisbane Public Works Director shall ensure enforcement.
So that's a separate document, the mitigation.
That is Chapter 4 of the Final EIR, the Mitigation Monitoring Program.
Oh, okay, so it's already identified
Yes.
in the FEIR.
Yes.
Okay, I haven't read Chapter 4 yet.
Yeah. So what that does, it takes each of the mitigation measures and gives you the description of how it gets implemented.
Okay.
And I have never seen in a final EIR, even presented at the end of the process, somebody costing out the mitigation measures. And one reason is we don't want to debate about a developer saying, I don't want to do that, that's really expensive. Because what these mitigation measures are designed to is to take a significant impact and what needs to be done to reduce that impact below the threshold. And unless it is so expensive and the cost, just no reasonable person could actually do it, that's where feasibility comes in. But not expensive, there might be a cheaper way. That is not part of a city's or lead agency's decision-making and implementing mitigation measures. Now, the city also has been working a long time, and there's been a committee working on a sustainability framework. And that sustainability framework is identified as being an aspirational document. This is what we as a community, once it's adopted, what we as a community want to see in terms of sustainability and sustainable development for the Baylands. So the concepts in that framework are part of the planning review that you will do. So this is not regulatory, the framework. It is not CEQA thresholds, impact mitigation. These are the aspirational goals that the committee is recommending the city use, you as the Planning Commission use in reviewing development for the Baylands. These identify key sustainability principles and creates an approach to implementing those principles. It's based on the framework on what is called the One Planet Living principles. I'll describe those in a second, and provides performance indicators. How do we know if this is being achieved? How do we know if it's not? And its status right now is there is a June 15th draft, which is the most recent. It was reviewed by the City Council, and it is in the process of being finaled, but it is not yet adopted. It will be, if it's still a draft document at the time of your deliberations, the document, June 15th document, actually exists now. It is part of what you can and should review as part of the package, ultimately as making your decisions. Now, the basic principles are zero carbon buildings, that buildings should be carbon neutral, not use carbon. Zero waste programs, not produced waste. Sustainable transportation, low carbon modes of transport, meaning transit, bicycles, walking. How do we do that? So those become planning principles that you can use as you review the individual scenarios. Local and sustainable materials, rather than importing fine Italian marble, use something closer. Local and sustainable food. Sustainable stormwater, which means efficient use of stormwater, not just sending water out to the bay, but addressing local flooding, protecting and enhancing wetlands, and addressing stormwater pollution, which in the case of the Baylands becomes very important in relation to the lagoon. Protecting open space and habitat, but not just protecting, but restoring and enhancing biodiversity and natural habitats. Protecting the culture and heritage of the community. And then economic vitality, but not just economics and pure dollars. But what the principles lay out, ecologically based economies that support equity, fairness to various segments of the community and being inclusive in the community. And then finally, health, safety, and happiness, promoting good health and well-being. So these are issues, many of them, that go beyond the physical environmental issues you're dealing with in the EIR, but they are part of the planning and aspirational goals that you will review as part of the overall EIR, or overall project, in addition to the EIR. There's a community opinion survey that addresses a wide range of community opinions. The survey was released back in August. Survey forms have been returned. The results are being put together, and next month you should have results to that, which will lay out a scientific review of what is the community thinking, and that is also just part of scientific survey of what is the community thinking, but is also for part of your review and input to your review as to what is it as a community that we want, and what do you as a commission feel comfortable recommending to the City Council.
Excuse me, was the survey pretty significant in terms of number of people submitted? Was it a significant ratio of people versus the total population?
I don't know that.
Yeah, we had a report just the other day that there were in excess of 580 responses, which for a survey of this community of the size is really a a really excellent response rate. So they're very confident. The survey consultant is confident they're going to have a statistically valid survey completed. So that's kind of the preliminary numbers are about 580.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, if I remember my college statistics right, that's about twice what you would normally expect. You'd normally expect a 10 to 12% return rate on that, and you've got somewhere up around 20, which is it's testimony to your community how active people are. What I'll talk about now are preview of coming attractions, just some of the options that you have at the end of this process. At the end of this process, you will be asked to, based on the workshops, based on all those documents, based on your review of the environmental impact report, based on all you're about to hear in however many more hearings we're going to have. But when you finally get to the point you're ready to close the hearings, there are a number of options that you have as to what you would recommend and how you would recommend it. And that's what I'd like to run through now. One thing to understand in our starting point is the relationship between your recommendation in terms of the land uses and land use policies that you recommend to the City Council and CEQA. What CEQA says is before the City Council, the lead agency, in this case the Brisbane City Council, before it approves a project, before if approving any of the components of the development program for the Baylands, the City Council would be required to do certain things, which means that if you recommend that they approve something, you need to recommend that they do these things. One would be before approving anything, the city must find that the EIR complies with the requirements of CEQA. And should you at the end of the hearings look at approving any one of those components, you would be provided, well, either way, you will be provided with a series of findings to support the decision that you're looking to make. And those findings will include CEQA findings. This is what the impacts are. These are the mitigation measures and so on. And findings if you want to move ahead with certification of the EIR as to that the EIR does in fact comply with CEQA. You would need to make a finding, council, you recommend, that the EIR reflects the city's independent judgment. Yes, you used consultants to prepare this. Yes, there are comments and responses from different agencies. But ultimately, this document, the EIR, needs to reflect the opinions and the judgment of the lead agency, the City of Brisbane. Legally, this is your document. This is not, gee, you had some consultant author a document for you, do we like it or not? This is your document, needs to reflect your independent judgment. And so in the end, if based on your judgment, all of what you've heard, you will be asked to make recommendations. Do we change? Do we accept? Or so on. And you will be asked before taking any action to consider the final EIR before taking action. Here is the thing that is important. To deny a project does not require certifying an EIR. So certification of the EIR is required for an approval, but not for a denial. Now, if you approve some aspects of some components, deny others, to approve any component requires certification of the EIR. But if your action is we're going to deny the applications that are in front of us, you need not certify the EIR. You need to consider it, but not make that recommendation. So what I'll do now is run through just generally some of your options. I'll start with approvals, and then we'll work our way from the major approval down to denials. One option you have, and these are not discrete options. It's really a continuum. There are lots of places in between you could fall as a commission and the council could fall. So I'll generally describe the options that you have. One option is recommend approval of the applicant's general plan amendment and their specific plan. So if at the end, based on what you've heard, you want to recommend approval, either as it's proposed or with minor amendments, gee, if you could change the height of buildings from this to this, increase a setback in the specific plan from this to this, reduce this number of square feet of something, things that you can easily describe, you have the option of recommending approval with minor revisions that you could describe as part of your motion. If that is your recommendation, or if that is ultimately council's determination, certification of the EIR is required. So for an approval in that manner, you would be required to recommend certification of the EIRs meeting the requirements of CEQA. You could look at those documents and then say, you know, I'm generally comfortable with that, or we're generally comfortable with that. We'd recommend approval to the council, but there's some major changes I want. I don't like, you know, for example, maybe the configuration of open space. It ought to be done differently. The configuration of land uses isn't quite right. And there's a lot of things that I think need to be changed, even though the basic concept's okay. And in that case, if they are things that you could describe generally, it would be good if you did this instead of what you did, but I can't give you every last detail now. You could recommend approval. You could identify those major changes and say, okay, we're willing to let it go forward to the council as long as what goes forward is those recommended major changes. You could say, bring those changes back to us and then we'll review it before approving it. Now, if you recommend, yes?
What I'd like to give you a situation where we consider certain alternate was not included in the EIR. Do we have to wait until that time? Or we can initiate now? Okay. For example, if I find something that was alternate was not considered in this EIR, where would be the appropriate time to do that?
I think, yeah, if based on the review of the EIR and the various alternatives, and remember, the alternatives are not everything that could be done out there. The alternatives are designed to frame various choices. And so as you get to the end of this process, because you have not heard any testimony on the project yet, you haven't heard the public in terms of that. So the appropriate place would be, if this is what you're looking at, or a denial with those major revisions because you would like something different, and I'll talk about that in a minute, the time would be as you're considering your recommendations on the project. So because your recommendations on what ought to be done should come following the public hearing, following public testimony. And the attorney will explain the reasons for that when I'm done. Yeah.
I have a clarifying question. So is there a separate specific plan for the DSP and the DSPV, or is there one specific plan that covers both?
One specific plan covers both.
Okay, and there's no specific plan for the CPP and no specific plan for any of the alternatives?
Correct. So, yeah, the applicant submitted a specific plan for the two scenarios, the DSP and the entertainment variant. City Council, then in looking at that, said, we want to additional scenarios that would be reviewed at an equal level of detail. And so council authorized the two scenarios, the CPP scenarios, but did not authorize a specific plan for those. And then the alternatives, there is no specific plan for them. So should you then, at the end of this process, say, no, we want one of those other scenarios, we want another alternative, one of the alternatives, or some hybrid, and I'll describe it in a minute, or something that's completely new, you could approve that at a general plan level. You could define a concept plan, and then a specific plan would need to be prepared and brought back to you, is the way that would work.
Well, I move the slide along. I think you have some discussion of this later in your presentation. So you're getting ahead of yourself a little bit.
Okay, yeah. And then on the major modifications, since you're recommending approval of something, you have two choices on the EIR. One is to either recommend certification of the EIR, or to say, bring us back those revisions, and we will review the EIR when we have those revisions in front of us. Okay. Now, we got a little bit ahead. We're talking about what would happen with a denial. One of your options also is to say, we should recommend denial of the applicant's proposed general plan and specific plan. We do not agree with those. In that case, we recommend that the council deny those applications. You have a couple options there. One is to say, we recommend denial, and we will not provide any new or additional land use policy. We will let our general plan stand as it is. We will let our zoning stand as it is. And we provide no direction as to what anybody ought to come back with, and we'll leave our rules all as they are. Keep in mind what that does is it leaves your general plan exactly as it is. And remember, there were two things we described 2 weeks ago. The description of the trade commercial that has references to industrial, that would remain in place. You could, as an option, say, we deny the applications. Let's modify that. Or modify anything else that sits in the general plan, like there is not a cap in the general plan clearly that says no more than this number of square feet of anything. If you simply deny the applications and let the general plan stand, you do not need to certify the EIR. You simply make findings why we are not approving anything, why we're denying those applications, and you could be done. Now, if what I just described, you would recommend denial of the applicant's proposed general plan amendment, denial of their specific plan, you could, at the same time you're recommending denial of their application, say, we recommend denial of the applicant's applications. However, this is what we recommend the council ought to approve. And that's the place where you talked about saying, let's do this instead. This instead could be, we like this concept plan, we recommend that concept plan. It could be one of the alternatives that's in the EIR. We recommend that council approve that alternative for the Baylands.
But if it's a totally different
I'll get there.
alternate, then would it trigger a new EIR or what?
I'll get there in a second.
Okay.
Okay. It could be a combination. We like this alternative on the landfill, this scenario, or this alternative on the landfill. We like this somewhere else. We'd like them to be combined into a single scenario, or alternative scenarios, but a description hybrid of what's already on the table. You could also, as you just mentioned, say, I have a whole new concept. Based on all I've heard, or based on all that we've heard, this is what we as a commission recommend for the Baylands. It's really none of these scenarios. It's none of the alternatives. We think this ought to be done. When you make those recommendations with this is what we ought to do, and then I'll get to the CEQA requirement. This is what we ought to do. The easiest way of doing that, and probably the only realistic way to do that, is provide your general recommendations. Don't try and redraw a whole new plan. You will be here through who knows how long.
Millennium.
Right. I wasn't going to say forever, but it will be a long time.
Yeah.
But you could say, we bring back a plan that is totally different and does A, B, C, and D, whatever A, B, C, and D are. You would describe generally the mix of uses. We want these uses. We don't want these uses. We want it more focused. I'm just making this up as I go along. So this is, we want a greater emphasis and focus on the transit station, so the development ought to be more clustered up in there, less development to the south, little development up on the landfill. So you don't need to go any more detailed than that unless you feel comfortable doing it. And you could describe the intensity of land use no more than X amount of square feet of total use. If you recommend residential to be included, as is you could set caps on that. You don't have to do the whole formal plan. A general description of it is fine. Then there comes the CEQA question. How do we deal with CEQA on either a hybrid or of different concepts or something totally new? And the answer is, what you need to do under CEQA depends on what you recommend. So when you come up with a recommendation that is not one of, or if you come up with a recommendation that is not one of the scenarios, not one of the alternatives, but you say this is what we want to recommend and we want certify the EIR for that recommendation, we would then do an analysis for you of, is that scenario that you're recommending, is that addressed in the EIR in sufficient detail to allow this EIR to be used for that recommendation? So that would be one way, or you could say, we're denying the applications, this is what we think ought to be done, this is what we're recommending land use ought to be, bring us back a plan, then we'll deal with CEQA for that plan. So you need not, if denying and making that land use recommendation, make your CEQA determination at that time. You could say, bring it back. And we may say, you've come up with something so different, we need to analyze whether the EIR covers that or not. There may be other recommendations. It could be something new, something new that would be enough that we could say, yes, the EIR covers it because of A, B, C, and D. When you make your recommendation, we'll work through with you to what extent does the EIR actually address what you're looking at recommending. Mm-hmm. And with that, any other questions on my part? Now the attorney will walk through your role in going through these hearings and kind of set some of the legal rules of the game for you.
That was pretty quick, sorry, for a change.
I'm practicing for my 15 minutes in each one.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Allison Crumbine. I'm an attorney with the Sohagi Law Group, and we serve as the city's outside CEQA and land use counsel. And I'll be here throughout the hearing process on this project. You've seen me a couple times, and you're going to see me some more. Prior to starting the formal public hearing process next week, I just wanted to talk briefly about the Planning Commission's role, and specifically the role of this body in considering and ultimately making a recommendation to the City Council about proposed development on the Baylands and the final EIR. And I also wanted to talk just briefly about the hearing process and some strategies you might consider as you embark on the hearing process. Just as very brief background, the Planning Commission derives its authority and duties through state law and also through the Brisbane Municipal Code. Planning commissioners are appointed by the City Council to represent and work on behalf of the public, and therefore must act in the public interest, meaning the interests of the community at large. As you all know, under the Brown Act, all of your meetings and deliberations must be open and public, and you must give the public an opportunity to listen and offer testimony as you deliberate. The Commission has a specific set of statutory responsibilities, which are set forth in state law as well as in the Brisbane Municipal Code. In general, your role is to advise the City Council on land use and related policy matters. State law specifically requires you to hold public hearings and make recommendations to the City Council in regard to general plan amendments, specific plans, zoning regulations. And where the Planning Commission is required to make a recommendation to the City Council, CEQA requires that the Planning Commission review and consider the EIR for those decisions, which is the reason that you are also considering the final EIR here. Let's see, going on. Specific to this project, as you know, you are acting in an advisory capacity to the Council. And you have been asked to hold a series of public hearings on the final EIR and on the proposed Baylands development. The specific role that you have here is to hold hearings and ultimately make recommendations. And in so doing, you are required to weigh the proposals before you in light of federal, state, and local law, regulations, city policy, in addition to considering the environmental effects of the proposed development that have been identified and analyzed in the final EIR. The Commission also must listen to testimony from the public and other interested parties, as well as considering written submittals and other evidence that are presented to you, and to take all of that information into consideration prior to making a recommendation to the City Council. I think you are all aware that you're probably entering into a fairly complex and lengthy process. There's a great deal of interest in this project in the community. It's been in front of the community for a long time. And I think we all realize it's going to be complex. So it's likely that the series of hearings beginning next week will be well attended, and that there will be many people wishing to comment and testify and to hear the presentations. Therefore, it's important for you to conduct these hearings in a professional manner, to ensure that everybody who attends understands what topics you'll be considering on any particular evening and how the hearing will proceed. So to that end, the Commission, I know there's a lot of materials on this project, but you should arrive at each hearing prepared to consider the issues that will be addressed at that particular hearing. For example, prior to next week's hearing, you should take some time to familiarize yourself with the biological and cultural resources issues that are addressed in the Final EIR. You'll be receiving a staff report that will highlight sort of issues to consider, both in terms of the environmental analysis and the way that analysis could inform planning decisions that you will make. And I do want to stress that while you all undoubtedly have views about proposed development on the Baylands, and that's of course fine, and that is your right, it is important that in your role as a planning commissioner representing the city of Brisbane, that you try to weigh in on the project and express those views only after you've had the opportunity to hear and consider the public comments and testimony that you will hear over the next months, and after you've had a chance to read all of the staff reports, the EIR, and other written submittals that you receive from the community and other interested parties. And that the time to do that, to express your views, would be during the deliberations on the project. Much of the responsibility of running an effective meeting falls on the Commission Chair. So Commissioner Doe, that's you. And it's important to try to set a tone for how a meeting will proceed. And there are a number of strategies that are commonly used by public agency hearing bodies to ensure that public hearings run effectively. And I just want to mention a couple that you might consider for the hearing process that will start next week. Now, there's no requirement to set any time limits on speakers that are appearing in a public hearing, but it is one way to ensure a fair process and to ensure that everyone who attends has an opportunity to address the Commission in a timely manner. I'll just throw out there, we don't know how many people will come to a hearing, but say, for example, you had 75 speakers who wish to speak. Even if you limit people to 3 minutes apiece, you're still looking at almost 4 hours of public testimony. And not all citizens who wish to engage in this process may have the time to attend a 4 or 5 hour public hearing. And so you might want to consider providing a hearing structure that will maximize the ability of all of your citizens to offer testimony on this project and to participate. Of course, if there are only a small number of commenters, that may not be necessary, but it's just something to consider. Another issue, just in terms of presentation of testimony, is to stress that all commenters approach the podium and speak into the microphone. As you probably know, when you're watching it on television, if people don't speak into the microphone, you can't hear what they say. It's also important, public testimony is part of the formal record of proceedings, and so if it's stated from the audience and not into the microphone, it won't be recorded. So that's something that you should stress to commenters. Another issue has to do with questions. Obviously, there's a lot of complexity to this project, and there will be a lot of questions, both from the Commission and from the public. All questions from members of the public should be directed to the Commission, specifically to the chair. So if a member of the public has questions, those should be raised during their testimony at the microphone. And if the Commission chair wishes to ask staff a question to respond to a member of the public, that question should come from the Commission chair to staff. Staff then responds to the Commission chair, and then that is the answer to the member of the public. So questions should not be directed straight from the audience to staff. almost done here. Obviously, staff is here to answer questions, so please, if there's any need for information, clarification, I know you all know this, but we're obviously here to answer your questions. Public testimony should be taken during the public hearing, so, you know, Lloyd obviously will be making presentations at every hearing. The commissioners may then have questions. It would then be time to formally open the public hearing, at which time members of the public will have the opportunity to testify, and then to close the public hearing at the end of each evening. And then after we finish the public hearing process, whether that takes 6 hearings, whether it takes more, that remains to be seen. At that point, you would close the public hearing and begin your deliberations, and then it would be the role of the commission chair to lead those deliberations. Just want to stress that your staff, we are here to assist you throughout this process, so please ask questions and as necessary. And if you have any now, feel free to ask them.
I think you covered everything. It's important to follow the procedure when it comes to the EIR review. And I think sometimes what happens is the planning commissioners also get involved in the discussion of in the hearings. And I think it's important that we hear what public is saying and reserve our comments towards the end. Okay.
We'll probably have more clarification questions as we move along.
Well, that concludes the staff presentation. We entertain any further questions from the commission, and you can feel free to open it up to the public if you have no further questions for us.
Do the public know the schedule of next hearings, what topic they will be discussing? So if they have, I think we should publish, we should put it on the board there and at the entrance of the city.
That's a good idea.
So that the people come prepared. And I think this particular document is so big that it will be good to have each chapter or whatever we're going to discuss in a little smaller format,
too. Mm-hmm.
So that it can be manageable rather than try to carry this whole thing for general public. It will be very difficult, you know.
Those are all very good ideas, yes.
Anyone else? So are we ready for public comment?
Yes.
We're ready for the public comments now.
Mm-hmm.
Can we have a motion to open to public?
Yes, I motion to open public commentary.
Second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Please approach the podium, but I have a actual written request here, so I'm going to address that first. Ms. Anya Miller.
Good evening,
Good evening.
Commissioners. I'm Anya Miller, Chair of the ad hoc committee that was reviewing the Draft EIR for a year, and we are quite familiar with how arduous the task of reading the material is, seriously doing so. And so Commissioner Anderson's effort to make it more readable, this massive material more readable through these hyperlinks between comment and response is really a very good tool, and I just know that people who do not know about that tool and further that then not how to use that tool, you absolutely have to have some sort of public instruction on how to read this document online using these hyperlink tools. I've tried it myself, and it does work now, even though it's still under review, but it does work. But I don't know anyone else who's doing it. Are you? Are you using
The hyperlinks, yes.
hyperlinks? And
Yes.
how do you know how to use it? Well, you must have been told somehow, but the public doesn't know. This is a public process. You really owe it. Before moving on to the formal hearings where people are supposed to present what they have read and studied, it really is jumping ahead of a very important public duty. that the city has to make sure that the citizens are able to look at the material, make their judgment, make their comments based on that. So I really think it's urgent that you commissioners direct your staff to provide some sort of public forum where a simple PowerPoint presentation can be made. This is how it's going to look. This is where you click. This is where you click. This is where you go for the table of contents. This is where you click. You know, they need to know that. So that's my first thing. The second is I'm still, even though we've had lots of explanations here, but the specific plan and concept plan definitions. As I read in this document, the CEQA requires a specific plan as an implementation of the general plan. Mm-hmm. Well, the developer's plan does not implement our general plan. So why is it a specific plan? Why isn't it just a concept plan like the other scenarios? We had 4 scenarios, 4 of them are concept plans, but 2 are also specific plans. Why? If they're not implementing our general plan? Well, they want a change in the general plan. Okay, if that's what we have to do, then you should have the consideration of the general plan changes first.
Agreed.
Specifically, allowing housing,
yes,
and allowing the amount of development square footage. That should come first. And then you consider a specific plan that would implement this general plan that you have then approved. So I think it's really, really a trap here to consider the general plan and the specific plan as if they were the same action recommendation you're taking. Please consider that. I really think you do.
I think those two, I agree with you fully. The terminology that used here, specific plan, is not in a specific plan. It's a specific plan after the amendment of the general plan.
Right, so that they're presented together as if they are the same action. It's not.
I had a problem with that too, and I was going to bring it up.
Let me just finish.
Let's not interrupt and let Anya finish.
Well, you have been very well described what you can do with the Final EIR. You do not have to just certify it. You can do some recommendations before. I was very glad to hear that. Before you actually certify it. But once you certify it, we have heard this over and over. That is something set in stone. And even if you have site-specific plans that then are calling for another environmental review, you may not necessarily get under the council at that time a real EIR. You may just have reference to this massive document and, oh yes, this will cover it. You don't need another EIR. It's a negative declaration as far as the specific site-specific plan. So you have to really be careful, and I hope you will be, with that particular danger of adopting a massive concept program EIR that can be used to undercut if there's been change for, like, you know, very, very many environmental factors may have changed by the time some site-specific idea comes up. And you may not call for an EIR because, oh, well, it's been covered based on 2010 data. So that's another concern I have. I just wanted to bring it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very, very, very good point.
Okay. Please step forward.
Good evening, Commissioners. I want to thank you guys for serving. Since these have been televised, I don't come down as much, but I watch you guys all the time, and You're doing a good job. Some of you.
Thank you.
So the reason why I'm here tonight is I also sat on the committee to review and respond to the DEIR. And one of the things that I found to be disturbing in these reports
Excuse me,
is...
could you identify yourself for record?
Sorry. Paul Buscal, Brisbane resident.
Thank you.
So what I found is that at the end of every chapter, pretty much the last sentence of every chapter, when they talked about mitigating the impacts, there were two words, and they were "when feasible." Mm-hmm. And I talked to somebody that we had working with us that was an expert in these type of reports, and he referred to those two words as weasel words. That does a real injustice to all the work that everybody's put into this project, and I think that should be omitted, or the word feasible should be explained, because I'm not quite sure, but I can imagine it's handfuls of reasons why it wasn't feasible. So I would hope you would consider that, and I would like some an explanation on those words tonight, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Joe?
Good evening, Honorable Planning Commissioners. I'm Joel Diaz, and I was just wanted to come here to see if we could get some more information at some point. Commissioner Jamil Munir brought up last night at the City Council Candidates Night, something about the high-speed rail and why it hasn't been considered at the Baylands, and I want to bring it up here tonight as well. And it seems to me that that's a very real and distinct impact on the Baylands, this public use, this proposed public use. And we've had ample notification of it. I see it's in the Draft EIR. It's in the Final EIR. Chapter 6 of the Draft EIR, it describes it as a 100-acre site that the high-speed rail needs. They've recommended Brisbane. It's the only available 100-acre site of flat land. There are no other sites. In the Final EIR Chapter 5, there's a letter from High Speed Rail that asks the city to continue to keep our project in its mind as it moves forward with the specific plan analysis. And it doesn't. I don't see where it was analyzed. Ironically enough, Chapter 6 of the Draft EIR is titled "Significant Unavoidable Impacts," and that's where it describes the 100-acre need of high-speed rail. And in terms of choices, this is a choice that predates this most of this process. In 2008, this was passed statewide by ballot measure by the state of California. And if it is indeed your charge to uphold public interests for the city and the state, it seems to me that this choice that the state has made in the public interests of our state and our citizens needs to be analyzed. Because I think the last thing that we want to do after investing all of this time is to somehow sort of erroneously entitle the property without considering the very real eventuality of the public use that's intended for this site. And we have ample documentation explaining that. I see in the comment and the response in Chapter 2, somebody explains here that the letter from the state doesn't raise any significant environmental issues regarding the adequacy of the Draft EIR. But I can't see how that does when the state asked to be included in the analysis. So they seem contrary. And it seems like we need some information. There's some gaps there, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so, especially because the way I see the Baylands is in two halves. And if the state is going to take one half or both halves, why we can't entitle something that's going to be split in half? So it seems to me there needs to be an alternative plan that shows what if the maintenance facility, what will the other half of the Baylands look like, or if we at least find out what the state is doing. It seems like an extremely special circumstance. This is not normal, and it's in the public interest. And it seems to me that we need to work with the state to protect taxpayers' money, because if the state is going to pay for this property, we certainly don't want to somehow make taxpayers pay more money for property that's entitled, that has sort of erroneously, that has to be paid for by the state and by the taxpayers. So it seems to me the city and the state need to work together, especially if this property, this land isn't already zoned for this type of use. So it's kind of like the cart before the horse type of thing. And it seems to me we need a lot more information on that. We need to look at that alternative. And so it seems to me the recommendation would be a major modification. I don't think it's way too early to deny anybody's application, but simply delay the certification, have a major modification, look at this real eventuality, understand why we have letters from the state, yet they were sort of discounted as unimportant, and the needs of the taxpayer's money was discounted as unimportant and irrelevant, an irrelevant choice that was approved by ballot measure. So that's what I would have to say tonight, and just would appreciate it if you guys could shed some more light on that at some point as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Tony?
Tony Virios, Brisbane resident. Thank you, commissioners. First off, the comment that Paul Buscal made 2 people back about the if feasible comment, I can see striking that completely from the document if the legal counsel approves such a option for the committee. That's a simple way to deal with that if it's legal. And secondly, on the comments that Mr. Diaz made about the high-speed rail, that was a highly contentious vote, and as I understand it, part of that system is being built at this time in Southern California, and there are all kinds of speculation, and I think something like $5 or $6 billion has already been committed or spent on it, but not a great deal has been necessarily accomplished in that process. So while the mayor of San Francisco and Board of Supervisors in San Francisco may have a gleam in their eye over seeing this come downtown through Brisbane, it seems like for Brisbane to plan around it and for its eventuality is extremely difficult because the state doesn't have a clue what it's doing yet, except for spending a lot of that taxpayer money that Mr. Diaz is concerned about, as we all are. So I would think that in terms of the possibility of them putting a maintenance yard in here in Brisbane and dictating by that through, in essence, an eminent domain kind of claim of our land, that there's a lot more land down by Fresno and other places along their railroad tracks that they can put their maintenance facility instead of Brisbane, and I don't necessarily think that's the best thing for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, Joel Diaz again. Sorry, Tony just reminded me that I forgot to say a couple things. So the proximity of the maintenance facility is crucial. It has to be within a certain proximity to San Francisco. So you can't be in Fresno or any other place. And all of that's in the plan that the state has, which for some reason we haven't looked at. We don't have that information. So there's a lot of supposition and speculation about possibilities without reading the information. The first process is to electrify the rail, which is starting, I think you guys know, starting next year. So the process has already begun. The money has been allocated, and the plans exist, identifying this as the only site. So it's important that we have the information in front of us and not just speculate and use supposition and conjecture to shoot holes in something that's going to happen anyway. The state has the power to do these things. The state is doing these things, and we can pretend like it's not happening, but I think in the end we're just wasting our own time. And we should really consider a real viable development there, and we need that alternative to understand what that is. Doesn't mean we need to proceed with that, but at least we need to do that part of the work. And that's all I'm asking for. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. So, did you? No? Okay. Sure? All right.
I make a motion to close the public hearings.
All in favor?
Aye.
Again, just for a point of reference, this wasn't a public hearing tonight, it's just a workshop.
Workshop, I
Just a
mean,
comment, yeah. So, in response to some of those questions, could we have some?
Sure, I'll jump in, and Lloyd can jump in, and Allison as necessary. Certainly the issues raised about high-speed rail are all ripe topics when we get to the issues of transportation and land use. I don't know that staff shares the position that was presented tonight, but again, not having a substantive public hearing on that item tonight, so those will be discussed, and those particular issues are up on your issues. The sort of blanket statement about that all the mitigation measures include an if feasible clause. Again, as we start going through these section by section analyses, we can all analyze the appropriateness of the mitigation measures as worded, and again, part of your ability and charge is to make suggestions as to changes as warranted. So again, that's on a case by case, topic by topic analysis. You all have access to all that information today, and as the mitigation measures for each of those topics are analyzed and reviewed, if you have concerns or questions about the wording, that's part of the public hearing process. And then in regard to the searchable PDF, again, I think part of that next work product, or ultimately the intent, and speak to some of the people who are more adept into this, would be some sort of user guide that went along with whatever final document exists, in terms of whether there's a benefit of having kind of a tutorial given various operating systems, and again, I'm not really the person who could answer if that's really a viable sort of one-size-fits-all kind of situation.
Yeah, just a couple things. There is, in relation to the use of the term feasible, a very specific definition under CEQA of feasible, and I can't remember the specific number, but one of the master responses in Chapter 2 of the EIR deals with that definition and the use of the term feasible in CEQA. So there is an explanation there of what the term means under the law and how it is used and intended to be used in the EIR. And separate from that, you can look at individual mitigation measures, whether that term is important or not in those mitigation measures. I think the second thing I wanted to say was in relation to the question regarding site-specific development that will follow the specific plan. And in Master Response 1, there is a description of this EIR as a program EIR, as well as how the EIR will be used for subsequent site-specific developments. And there is, under the law, and I can't remember the section, this is why I have an attorney sitting next to me, but a very specific description as to how you will need to look at subsequent site-specific analyses to determine whether the analysis in the EIR does in fact cover the project. And one of the issues, a site-specific development project, and one of the issues is, are there changed circumstances? Are there new impacts? Are there new significant impacts? So it's not simply saying, oh, now we have a site-specific impact, a site-specific project. Yeah, we address that in the EIR. You will be specifically asked to evaluate that site-specific project as to whether it was in fact addressed, whether it raises new issues, whether there are in fact new impacts. And there's a very specific set of requirements under the law as to how you will do that. And if, as in later hearings, you want that described in more detail, we can't cite that section, but that is described in state law.
So just to make sure that we're on the same page, you're saying that it's not an automatic default?
There is not an automatic, there is no automatic default that there is no EIR on a subsequent project. just as there is no automatic default, nor can there be an automatic default, that there will be an EIR on every individual project. What CEQA, you want to go ahead?
Just so you understand, every time there's a discretionary approval in front of the city, CEQA applies. So there's never a time when CEQA doesn't apply. It always applies when you have a discretionary approval. So each and every time any project comes before you, it's always a question of what level of CEQA review is required. And as Lloyd said, and it's CEQA guidelines 15162, and it basically sets forth the way that you look at a subsequent approval to decide whether the previous EIR covers it or whether it doesn't. And the questions are whether there's new or more severe significant impacts, whether there's new information, whether there are changes in circumstances. So it's unlikely that development 10, 15 years down the road, it's unlikely, it may be covered, but you just don't know until you look at it. But CEQA always applies every time there's an approval before you. So,
can I ask you a question on that? Suppose we approve the EIR now, and the data is based on what we collected now. The project goes 10 years from now, where the traffic pattern, everything is changed. Would that trigger a new EIR at that time, new analysis? Because the data is obsolete. 10 years of time frame is quite a long time frame.
It's always going to be situation specific, so I can't give you a blanket answer. But if circumstances underlying a development have changed sufficiently so that the previous analysis would no longer be applicable, then yes, it's likely you would have to do a subsequent document of some kind.
I'm not talking about the development itself, but the surrounding areas where there were nothing there before, and now all of a sudden this whole thing is changed. We got 4,500 homes surrounding this particular site. They were not there. Even though you probably projected in your analysis when you did that, but the actual situation may still be different. And another thing is this particular EIR, how far back we are, what is this based on, which year? All the data that you analyzed so far, is it 2011 or what year is it?
The baseline year against which impacts are analyzed is 2010.
Okay.
Okay, and that is, there is a master response that explains why. And you will be asked, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, however long in the future, when a discretionary project comes forward, have the circumstances changed to a sufficient degree that the analysis in the EIR, the one that would be looked at now, no longer applies for this site-specific project. And so one of your findings, however many years in the future, is, yes, circumstances have changed. We need to update whatever study before we could do this, take an action on a site-specific project. You will be asked to make that kind of finding under CEQA for all of your future site-specific actions. Have circumstances changed such that we need to update our original studies?
Okay. I have a follow-up question on that. You mentioned it's 2010 data we are using. Right now we are in 2015, and we are in the process of approving or reviewing this particular EIR. Are you going to submit some kind of a data to show that there's not a significant difference between 2010 data and 2015 where we are reviewing right now?
I think the simple answer is no. What CEQA requires is a baseline year be established, essentially based on when was the notice of preparation sent out. And the reason for that is big projects requiring a lot of review, you'll never get them done. Because if it takes a year to 2 years to get to public hearing, you could say, okay, now we got to update a study. By the time that's done, you're done reviewing. Now, so CEQA requires analyzing against the baseline year. You will be asked to make findings as to the adequacy of the document under the law. Are the impacts determined? And are the studies valid? So if the developments and things that have occurred over that several-year period are consistent with the analyses and assumptions that were used in going into the EIR, and I think we're talking it's primarily going to be in traffic, and
Yes.
we can talk about that when we get to traffic. Yes, we can demonstrate that the development occurring between 2010 and 15 was anticipated in the earlier study. So that's a question as we get to individual issues, and we can deal with them specific to each of the issues we'll be addressing.
So you will be talking about that during the public hearing?
Yeah, we can address that specific question for the various different issues we deal with.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question, or perhaps it's more of a proposal for a discussion regarding the schedule. Now, we have a number of things that we're setting out to do here, and one of them is to decide on appropriate land uses for the Baylands, and the other is to certify the EIR. But land use is just one of the items listed in public hearing number 6 in the section where it's covered in the EIR. And based on our experience with reviewing the DEIR, I can say that land use is very much of a public interest. In fact, no matter what we were studying, people couldn't hold themselves back but to talk about land use and say it should be like this, and like all of the section studies. So I feel this section is very likely to go over, and some of the other sessions are very likely to go over. And there was a discussion earlier about limiting communication so that everyone has enough time, and limiting the time that the meetings go to so that people don't have to stay up until midnight or after midnight, as has been happening in some of the recent city council meetings. And I think it would be a really good idea if we decided what parameters we were going to set so that we didn't exceed those bounds, and what we're going to do if they're exceeded in terms of like how we're going to schedule more hearings, should it be necessary, if enough people come to these meetings.
I just want to kind of, on the land use issue, I think we all understand that, really what you're doing here is driven by land use recommendations. And I think I don't want to get tripped up in, there's a very CEQA specific discussion of land use as an environmental topic. And then there's the broader issue of making broad land use recommendations to the city council. I think as we've talked about, and that relates kind of to the project or the concept plan or whatever you end up wanting to recommend to the council. And as you indicated, that whole broader array of land use is going to be in play at every meeting. Because we talk about biological and cultural resources. What are the implications of those findings on what a land use program for the site? It's very different from the idea of there's an environmental impact associated with particular land use policies in the general plan that relate to environmental issues. So I want to make sure those are kind of, we're using the same term, but it has kind of a expanding or collapsing meaning. It means one very specific thing in the EIR discussion, but the broader question of land use policy and land use recommendations are in play every meeting. So I don't think anybody's going to be constrained to say, no, we can't talk about the developer's proposal or the community plan or the renewable energy because its land use isn't on the agenda tonight. Land use in that regard is always on the agenda. So I'd bring that up as kind of just a point of clarification. And then in terms of how the commission operates, I think that's something that you have certain rules about when meetings typically end. An end time, you want to suspend the rules if you have a room full of, you might want to be in a position where at the beginning of a meeting you review the room, you survey the room, see how many people who want to speak, figure out if you think you're going to be able to get that in an evening and a time limit that works for everybody. If not, and there's going to be a need to continue, you do that either at the beginning of the meeting or you start going with it and you see. It's hard to, until you probably get a sense of the degree and amount of public testimony. But I think, again, the goal here is for you, I'm sure, and for us is to be inclusive, give everyone the opportunity to make their comments and not sit around here till 2 in the morning to do so. So those are all commission decisions, on a meeting by meeting, topic by topic basis. Some evenings may generate more or less attention. So I don't know, again, tonight, can you really figure out what that program is, unless you want to say you're not a hard stop at fill in the blank of a time, and you figure that out on a night by night, how long people are going to speak, or, well, we're going to continue this to, a date specific, because you always have to continue to a date specific, so that would be kind of the challenge here as we move forward.
So given that we have our first public hearing
next week
on biological resources and cultural resources, do we want to discuss the general guidelines now?
Yes.
In an attempt to kind of create a framework and let people have an idea of what we're expecting or hoping to achieve?
Yes, I think it's very important that we decide in advance how we're going to handle these situations so that it's not just a surprise at the meeting.
Yeah, sure. So does anyone want to start with some suggestions?
Greg, you want to go first, and then I will follow you?
How about Dave?
Dave?
Do we have any suggestions?
Well, I think, the assessment is a good idea after we have this framework. So just to say that, I mean, I want to make sure we can adjust it too. So if it's a smaller number of people, we can adjust the time and they can have more time to talk. So that said, council recommended 2 to 3 minutes depending on the quantity. I mean, it's not a lot of time. So if we're I think going by the time we want to get out of here and work backwards from that's probably my recommendation. So if we want to set a time that we want to end the meetings and then determine how many minutes. I don't know, it's hard to say how many minutes is going to be.
What is our specific, when do we have our hard stop usually?
Your rules basically indicate your meetings will adjourn at 10:30
Right,
p.m.
it's 10:30 right now.
So I have some suggestions.
Okay, so can we decide on what end time first?
Well, my suggestion was I think that the normal stop time seems reasonable to me, and I think we should announce that we're planning on stopping at 10:30 and give ourselves the option of a 15 or 30-minute extension if we feel it necessary at the time, but to not go past 11 p.m. I also think that we could streamline the process if we asked people who had short comments of 1 minute or less to speak first and get all of those out of the way, and then give the remainder of the people 2 or 3 minutes and cut them off at 3 minutes. And then if we get through everyone, people who have had their 3 minutes and still want to speak further can come back and continue to address the commission until we run out of time or everyone has had their say.
So that would assume that people would have had written requests first, correct? Because
yeah, I think we would start with the...
Yeah, because that would be really difficult if we're having rebuttal back and forth because someone's triggered by someone else's comment up here.
Well, yeah, my suggestion, if we did decide to go ahead and try to do the quick comments first, any rebuttals to quick comments would have to come once we opened it up to longer comments. And I don't think we have to take that suggestion, but I think it might be worth trying because there might be a number of people who just wanted to get a quick word in, and then they wouldn't necessarily have to stay till 11 to do that.
Right, it's a good idea.
And
like that.
to the chair's point, we're not always real rigorous in terms of a commission typically requiring people to fill out the speaker slips, but I think in this particular project, I think it will be beneficial for everybody and even for your own sort of efficiency. So we will make a with the chair's kind of encouragement to make sure that speaker cards are filled out so it's very clear. And even with the time, if you want to go with this sort of time hierarchy, that's made clear too, that's kind of part of the organization of the meeting.
Because I was thinking one of the ways we could do that is group it by not just the time that people are projecting, but also by the topic. So if there are written requests, it gives us a clearer idea as to how to at least group people together or give people an idea to group them together. So if they feel that projected questions do not relate or concern them, they're also free to go or watch it on TV as opposed to having to stay until 11 o'clock. So that would be another way we could.
Yeah, we already have 2 or 3 topics per meeting, so that would give us a framework to do that. It might be difficult to organize, but I think it's worth trying.
Yeah, but there's a lot within biological resources, and there are a lot in cultural resources.
Yes, no,
So
I'm saying
yeah.
the fact that we have those 2 categories gives us a framework where we could potentially try to do that differentiation.
Right.
I think it might be a little more complicated, but I think it's worth trying.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. And also, I think for record-keeping purposes, if we're note-taking, so that we're doing deliberations, which is 7 meetings later, for deliberation purposes, we're not going to be able to keep up with or keep track of the comments that were made to be inclusive, right? So the more written information we have, the more we have to refer to later and not risk missing any comment that was made.
I'll make one more comment that if the member of the audience has not finished what he wants to say and he still has the desire to have more feedback, even if you have to schedule another day, we should allow that, because in the past important EIR that I was, CORE project and others, there was a lot of interest and people complained that I didn't even finish what I was planning to say and you cut me off, So I think that we cannot be very rigid here, because it's actually the time for the public to express their views. And if you don't give them that particular time, I'm sure we're going to hear that I didn't get the chance to talk about that at all. I was cut off and all of that stuff. So I think we have to be very open, and we cannot be very rigid on our schedule over time. 6 hearings and cannot be finished within the time frame that we allocated. We have to give more time. We waited how many years now? Started in 2010. Are we going to really rush through this, not allow people to make their significant comments? So I think we have to be very open to the public's comment and give them as much time as possible. And I don't see why we should impose 3 minutes only and you get out. No. I think the person has more to say. We can have the 3 minutes over, then he can be given another chance that come back again.
I think the suggestion was made for efficiency and practicality, but it was a suggestion, nothing more. And so
why are we worried about efficiency? We don't have to worry about efficiency because we are here to hear the public comments, and this is not an efficiency test that we're going to finish it within a certain time frame.
No,
we don't have that.
I don't mean it's an efficiency
I hear
test.
that many times.
Please don't misunderstand. I'm not saying that it's an efficiency test.
Right.
I'm saying that it's practical. And we have never, again, I remind everyone that in our history, we have never cut anyone off. We have stayed here till 11 or 12 midnight past, and we have listened to everyone. But I think that suggestion goes to the substance of the comments. Oftentimes, there have been comments that are either repetitive, redundant, or actually irrelevant. And those are things that we do need to consider, and that is part of our jobs. And so in order to not only be, quote-unquote, efficient administratively, we need to also be respectful of the public's time, because not only are we sitting here listening to these comments that may or may not be relevant, but the public is also required to sit through that as well. So I think it's just a balancing act, and that's why we're not, when we were discussing this, that was raised as a suggestion. We still haven't actually decided that. So I think that's still open for discussion. It makes sense that what you're saying is that we actually need to listen to our own public, and this is a huge project that is meaningful for everyone. And so no one here has disputed that, and I agree with that, the fact that we do need to listen to everyone.
And we cannot foresee the relevancy. Something that not relevant to us may not be relevant to the public. So I don't think we should make any judgment here that because this is not relevant, I'm not going to give any time.
Well, there can be very specific examples, such as if we're talking about biological resources and someone raises transportation, then I think that the most sensible answer would be, let's wait till we talk about transportation.
And that's
so
okay.
so I'm saying there are examples, and I'm just reminding us that there are things to be considered other than the fact that it's time.
Yes.
No, I do agree with your point that we should give everyone as much opportunity as possible to speak as long as they want. But there are trade-offs here.
Yeah.
If people are allowed to speak for a long time at the beginning of the meeting, then that'll force other people to stay later than they want to. That was why I suggested an initial limit of 3 minutes so that we could go through everyone in the room once and then open it up for longer comments for people who wanted to stay till 11.
Yeah, that will be okay. That will be okay. But what I was worried about, that we just going to cut off the people and say no more, because we have to meet this schedule. We have to be efficient here. No, we have to get the public input.
Yeah, I don't think anyone was saying that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And,
Speaking of public input.
Yeah.
oh,
So we have public input.
Yeah. Well,
I
it's
guess
not
we,
like it's
is
Yeah.
there,
job, right? So
okay, we don't have to open and close.
right.
Okay.
so yeah.
Barbara Ebel, I just thought maybe you might want to consider how you're going to handle people who have comments on multiple sections, whether you're going to make them just make one comment and then sit here and wait, or whatever. I just wanted to throw that out there so you had a chance to consider it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Barbara. I think the basic guideline is if it's multiple comments and it's within the subject matter at hand, then one of the ways is that we can group. So, for instance, if they wanted to comment on biological resources and cultural resources, what we could do would be that we have either we go with the time hierarchy and talk about both at the same time, or we go with the time hierarchy and deal with biological resources first and then cultural resources. But again, we have no way of knowing any of that until we actually see the questions before us or have the comments be made that night. So that's a good consideration, but I think it's too amorphous for us right now. Tony?
Tony Varios, I think Greg's idea is great in terms of if you have a show of hands and people say my comment's very short and they all line up and knock them out quickly, that's great. And they can stay all night and they can come back later if other people leave and there's more time and they think of something else they want to say, and they can take much longer if it fits into the schedule of the commission. So I think that's a valuable idea. You don't have to cut people off, except like Commissioner Doe said, if they get way off topic, and then you can just respectfully advise them that you're getting off. Could you please stay on the topic? Something like that might not be too offensive.
Yes.
But the other comment that I'd like to make is my eyes are good for long distance, not good for reading. I have to wear reading glasses. But that clock's not very big, and where it's positioned doesn't help. If I'm up here talking to you now, I'm not looking at that clock. And I think that would be great to have a clock, either if it could be projected up on that screen, because most computers have clocks built into them these days, or any other kind of way to do it, as well as for you. If you I don't know if you can all see that fine, but it would help to have a nice big clock, and that way people don't just start talking extemporaneously or reading a filibuster of some sort for a half hour.
Well, in the past, we did have someone to remind you the time is up. So there was actually a person.
I guess that's another question I have for our staff, is that will we have someone like we had yesterday?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry? We can use the timer?
You have a timer actually on that dais in front of you, and we don't use it. But again, we can. And I think the idea of projecting something is a good idea.
Good idea.
We'll look into that. It's a good suggestion. So we'll see what we can do.
Madison, did you have something?
Hi, Madison Davis. First, I want to say thank you for keeping this in mind. I know as somebody who attends many city council meetings, it can often be a challenge when I'm here at 12:30 and the fatigue starts hitting me. So I think that's very wise of you to consider the public. And also, if we do have that hard time at 11 o'clock and there are still people that want to talk, then maybe that's the point where you extend it to, you kind of push the time frame out, like Jamil said. Maybe we bring this back next time and kind of push the other workshops or the other public hearings later. But I know what was really helpful for me last night, and probably Jamil and Commissioner Doe, was that we were able to have somebody who was taking time for us. So even if there is a clock, sometimes people are so into what they're saying that they're not keeping track themselves. So what's great is maybe somebody could be back there in the corner with, you have 1 minute left, or it's time to stop, like what happened at the debate. I don't know if anyone would be willing to take that on, but I think that's a good way to respectfully let people know, kind of help guide them in terms of how much time they have, so they know how to wrap it up.
I think it was done in the past, and that's what I just mentioned.
Right.
It was done in the previous major EIRs.
So if we have like signs, some sort of signs that say 1 minute, 30 seconds, or
somebody with the board showing you that 30
that
seconds
would be
left.
Great. And then I think that also helps people be respectful, and then you guys don't have to be the bad guys where you're jumping in and saying, okay, your time's up. Nobody wants to do that. So I think that would help everybody. So thank you.
Is that a possibility? And who would like to do
We
that?
can certainly work, we'll try to figure out a way that, I think, again, once you establish a pattern and I think people see it modeled, good behavior, I'm hoping that the modeling of the behavior will help this along. But it is kind of a different step for us, and I understand we need to help sort of the public along to get used to a business operation here for this particular project. So we'll work with you the best we can to do that. We'll draw straws and see who gets
Also, I want to add one more thing. In the past, there were a couple of occasions where we even had to call the police to get some individuals out. So I know that we have to be prepared for that, since we are trying to set the guidelines here. So be careful, okay?
You are sitting at the end.
Right.
So I also have a comment on the topic of continuations. And we had this issue with the DEIR when we were studying it in the Citizens Committee, where some of the sessions ran over for the scheduled time. And in that circumstance, we couldn't redo the entire schedule. It was way too complicated. There were too many people involved, and they already had their plans to go on specific dates. The same thing is going to happen here. This schedule has been published. A lot of people have read it. They've made notes on what days they want to go. If we have to extend any session, I think all of the overflows should fall into the meetings originally scheduled for deliberations. And then we will know in advance if that's happening. And when we get to those meetings, we can reschedule the deliberations to a later date. And then we'll always be reconvening to a specific date, and we won't have to let people change their plans.
Yeah, that's one way of doing it. I think, we'll work with the commission on that and whatever makes sense. I mean, there are other things that we don't do as a commission, and you may not be willing to do as a commission, in terms of if you had a rollover and you had people then who were specifically for a night and they didn't get to speak, or they had it continued over, well, maybe instead of kind of going to the end of the queue, for example, if you were to start the next meeting at 6 o'clock, and you have a regular workshop started at 7:30, so that gives you an hour and a half, for example, in the evening, and it's not pushed off,
I guess it depends on how many people we have.
Exactly.
If we've only gone halfway through the room, then I think we should overflow it. If we have 3 people, maybe we should go to 11:15.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that's a good suggestion that you made.
Yeah, and I was going to say that another cautionary idea would be that when we do it and we push it all the way back to November 16th into the deliberations, if it's an issue that is at the first public hearing, that's October 1st, you're doing over a month's worth, and people might forget, or we actually would have to we might forget, and so we don't want to do that either. So that might be something we consider. And so I really like the suggestion coming in an hour earlier. That way we have time to notice the public, in addition to dealing with that. But assuming, of course, the number of overflows that we have.
I have a question. Do we need 10-day notice to make it an hour earlier?
No, it's 72-hour notice.
Okay. Well,
So
that's,
that would work on a
that sounds
schedule
like a
where
workable suggestion then.
Yeah, that works better, I think.
I like
Yeah.
that, I agree.
Or we can stay and, at the beginning of the meeting, we can suggest to extend it to past 11 if we have to. If we feel that within another half hour, we can get that done and wrap that section up,
Right.
then it's worth staying half an hour. So that's an opportunity as well, right? Oh, Anya?
I was still wondering about getting everybody in, and you really should be very open. And this concern about remembering that it's your concern that you may not remember the comments at the end of these hearings. Don't you have a record?
Yeah, there'll be minutes, and there'll be less than a full transcript, but there'll be more than action minutes. So yes, there'll be a fairly extensive minute record. Yes.
So if people have questions and they've been answered by staff through your direction, then you will have the record. So you can review. If you forget, you can review the
Well, we
record.
just want to make sure we want to keep it fresh. The fresher, the better, I think, not just for us, but also for the public. Because if you're not, even if you're viewing at home, you're going to have to go back and review that if we were to push it all the way into the deliberations for November 16th. That was my point.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I don't entirely share that view. I mean, I read the DEIR a long time ago, and I can't remember specifics about it, but I remember it pretty well. I
Yeah.
think I have a good working memory of it,
Yeah.
and we'll have notes and minutes. So I think if we only get through half the room, then postponing till the end is probably our best option.
Sure.
But hopefully, I agree, if we have a small number of people we need to get through, then the other suggestions, I think, that should be employed in those
Yeah.
circumstances.
I think the key word here is adaptability, and we have to adjust as we go.
Yeah.
So, and I think the staff is agreeing to that, the public agrees to that, and we agree to that.
Great.
Yep. So are we good with that general framework?
I think we have a framework.
That's good.
So can we make a request to the staff that you put the general framework that we've just discussed into some sort of document so that when we post it along with our public hearing list,
It'll
we
be,
can post that along too, so to remind folks.
Absolutely, and we'll probably, just as a point of clarification, we'll run a draft by the chairperson to make sure we've adequately captured your sort of approach.
And I will make sure to circulate that amongst us so that we're all on the same page. Okay.
Excellent.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you. So with that, can we conclude the workshop? Okay. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So on to our consent calendar. Before we actually move to adopt this consent calendar, is there anything that any commissioner here wants to change or amend?
None.
Otherwise, may I have a motion to adopt the consent calendar as it stands?
Yes, I motion to adopt the consent calendar as it was published.
And I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So I believe we moved the oral communications up, so we are all set unless there's anything that the public...
Actually, you only move the commission items.
Oh, okay.
So
So
oral communication.
For oral communications, for anyone wanting to address the commission on any items not on the agenda. Please move forward.
Paul Buscal, Brisbane resident. Thanks again. So I was here last week till about 1 a.m. for the council meeting, and it was all about, at the end, about zoning. I'm sure you're aware of it. It came through you guys. And I don't know why we have those something that's that significant comes up so late in the meeting, to the point where even a council member says, it's late, I'm tired, not thinking straight. When we have something that's that important, I think it should be brought up earlier in the meeting to where people are fresh and can, be clear on their decisions that they're making, because that was like a real big deal. I don't want to get into too many of the particulars. There was a comment made by staff about the fact that this zoning wouldn't affect residents like the zoning for the freight forwarders in the industrial park would. And I thought that was, I don't know what word to use, but it was inappropriate, to say the least, because the people in the trailer park and all the residents on Bayshore and the backside of San Bernardino Avenue are well within the 300-foot limit of being affected by what's going to go on over at VW&R in particular. And I know there were comments made about, notification. I mean, why weren't they notified? So, this is, when we're talking about zoning changes and there's residential overlap, we need to be real clear and transparent and work with those neighborhoods. So, thank you.
Thank you. Joel?
Hi, Joel Diaz. Just to sort of piggyback on what Paul brought up about the VWR site, I think it's really frightening to think that a site like that could be entitled or granted some use rights without fully understanding the toxic problem there, the contamination, and coming up with a contamination plan. And I think that there was some sort of water regional control board plan, some sort of RAT plan that nobody knew about. The information exists, but yet we don't have it. And I noticed this trend. I don't know if it's just here across the nation, but it seems like these multi-million or multi-billion-dollar holding company investment companies are buying up this contaminated land, and we're sort of giving them a pass to use that property without taking care of the contamination. And I have a really strong feeling and concern that it's not going to be a priority for them to clean it up, and that we're not going to have the financial muscle to make them clean it up after the fact. And so I think that for some reason we don't have some sort of established protocol as a city or commission to take care of those things, and I think that we should. And I think that it shouldn't go that far. It shouldn't go all the way to the council without somebody getting that information and at least getting it to the council. Or I'm not sure what happened there, but I think we need to look at it. With the Baylands, it's a similar thing. Very large company owning huge contaminated tract of land. VWR, now it's going to be purchased by a very huge company, and we don't even know the extent of the contamination. And so that's it. Thank you.
Anyone else?
No one else.
No one else? Okay. So can we have a motion to close oral communications?
Yes, I have a motion to close. Oh, no? We don't need
the motion.
We don't need
Okay,
that.
we don't
Okay.
need it.
No.
So
Still a workshop.
No, it's not a
No,
workshop.
it's not a workshop. It's
Yes,
just oral communications. Yes, thank you. So, staff,
Written,
can we?
Written communications, I don't know if you have any.
other than this one here, which we got.
So those the oral communications during that.
I'm
section.
sure we're on item G now I know we're kind of flip-flopping our agenda, so a little.
Item G.
Yeah, we're on to item G on our agenda, is written communications.
Okay, so we've noted those comments then?
Did you receive any written communications in your packet? That's really what that's all about.
No, I'm just trying to clarify. So we've noted the oral communications comments.
Yes, they're in the record.
So in terms of written communications, we've had the California Energy Commission information about the workshops they're having. You can find more information on www.energy.ca.gov. We also have a flyer for the 19th Annual Indicators Report from the Sustainable San Mateo County pamphlet. And we have the San Francisco Business Times. In addition to that, do we have anything else? No?
No.
Okay. All right. So items initiated by the staff?
I don't have anything this evening.
Okay. And items initiated by the commission has been moved up and addressed. Any subcommittee updates, though? Okay. So, we're ready to adjourn? Okay. We have a motion?
I make a motion to adjourn to a special meeting of October 1st, 2015 at 7:30 p.m.
Have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you so much.